Welcome to Better Humanhood, where we build a better world by building better people. We have to live on the planet, and we have to live with other people. We have conversations about making that a wonderful proposition.
Hey there, welcome back to Better Humanhood. Happy June, y'all. Hope you're having a great day, great month, great year, great life. I've always been a big reader. I was in kindergarten while everybody else was in reading group, learning what sound the letter A makes. I was in the library reading books, like books. Things that might be considered for later elementary school or even middle schoolers today. I plowed my way through 80 or so Hardy Boys books by the time I was in 4th grade. It's not to brag, I'm just giving you a frame of reference for what I'm talking about today. I have what might be called a fairly retentive memory. If I write something down by hand, I probably don't need to look at it again. I can write out a grocery list at home, forget to look at it until I get ready to check out and find that maybe I missed 1 out of 20 things. Again, not to brag. That kind of steel trap memory is as much a liability as it is a boon. I can remember grocery lists and account numbers. I used to remember a lot of phone numbers too, but you don't have to dial by number anymore, so I don't. But I also remember every insult from elementary school, and man, can I hold a grudge. So reading is a primary activity for me. I sit down to do it, and I don't do anything else while I'm reading, except maybe listen to classical music. I used to walk and read, but the older I've gotten, the slower my reflexes are, and frankly, the less I care about things outside the book. So I'm more likely to walk into somebody or something, like a building or a car. Listening, though, is a secondary activity. I listen to audiobooks while running or cleaning or cooking. I listen to podcasts while working out or working or doing mundane things that require my body and hands, but not my focus. Sometimes I'll go back and listen to something a second time as a primary activity. For example, I want to take notes, but by and large, I can listen and absorb the important stuff. People spend a lot of time listening. In fact, they spend more than half their waking hours either reading, listening, or watching. About 38 hours watching television shows and movies in a week, 8 hours reading books, magazines, and newspapers, and 18 hours listening to recorded music and radio. So that's 38 and 18 is 56, and 8 is 64. There are 168 hours in a week. And if you're sleeping, 8 times 7 is 56. 56 off of 168 is 112. Yeah, I'm doing math in my head while just looking at my screen. How do you like that, Maple? So that's that steel trap mind, right? 112 waking hours in a week, say, and 64 of them are spent reading, listening to music and radio, or watching TV and movies. Well, none of these studies addresses podcasts, which falls somewhere between talk radio and audiobooks, I guess. We know a few things. We know that audiobooks are more engaging than films or TV. I've got links to these studies, by the way. Listening is a shortcut for assimilating our brains to our surroundings. Listening, which I'm quoting from a study here, listening, which means giving attention to sound, tunes our brain to the patterns of our environment faster than any other sense. And paying attention to the non-visual parts of our world feeds into everything from our intellectual sharpness to our dance skills. The richness of life doesn't lie in the loudness and the beat, but in the timbres and the variations that you can discern if you simply pay attention. There's an argument that says listening isn't like reading at all, and there's an argument that says they're more or less the same. So I want to tell you about 3 audiobooks that I've enjoyed and why I listen to them instead of reading them. One is Infinite Jest by David Foster Wallace. You probably understand why I'm listening to that one. If you haven't seen it, it's 1,100 pages long. It's in tiny text, unbroken. I haven't found a versionless print that is suitable for eyes older than about 24 years old. And it's written in David Foster Wallace's classic style, where he likes to stick footnotes in there just to stick them in. Nothing that you really need to learn. So I'm listening to that. It's about 60 hours. I managed to get a credit for $6.95 on Audible. So that's a lot of listening for not much money. I don't know what you pay for a movie and how long it is, but probably not 60 hours. Here's a second one. Digging Up Mother by Doug Stanhope. Doug Stanhope's a comedian. I really enjoy his work, and I don't know if you've heard his podcast. He's got a rotating cast of characters that just come in and out of there, and he's got some of them in the audiobook. Yeah, so he reads sometimes somebody from the podcast will read some of the audiobook, and sometimes, some of the people that he's writing about, because it's a memoir about how he didn't really help his mother commit suicide, but kind of did. For legal reasons, he didn't really, but he kind of did. She was in hospice care and whatever. Yeah, he does a bit about it, saying he bar-backed it. But anyway, he has people that he writes about in the book come in, and they have a conversation that isn't in the book. So they'll read a section of the book, and then they'll talk about it a little bit. Same goes for Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins. This was an interesting one, is he worked with a ghostwriter named Alex Skolnick, and he had the ghostwriter actually read the audiobook. And what would happen is they'd get to the end of a section, and then they'd have a conversation about it. And a lot of it was Skolnick, the ghostwriter, asking Goggins questions about it to get more stories out of him. So it's really a podcast audiobook, companion. So it's a little different than just the book. Now, I'm going to assume that you listen to this podcast because you're listening to this podcast, if you're hearing me say this. I'm hoping you also listen to JKWD. It's a podcast I do with Kelvin, my buddy Kelvin Ringgold. It's a more of a self-development deal, and a lot of times we interview people on there. We've had some good ones recently. I want to let you know about some other podcasts I listen to find out what you're listening to. What are you putting in your brain? Because it's super important. Now, if you go over to joshshear.com, I've got a blog post up this week with some links to some of my favorite episodes. But for the sake of the podcast, I'm actually just going to open up my podcast app and talk a little bit about what I'm looking at here, about what I'm listening to. One is Astonishing Legends. These guys go super deep into stuff like Black Eyed Kids and Skinwalkers, and they did a series on the Mothman. They recently did a multi-part series on the Patterson-Gimlin footage of Bigfoot, and it's been super cool. I've been listening to them since pretty early on, and I got to hear them go from hobbyists in this realm to full-time, this is their full-time gig now, and they have an army of volunteer researchers, and just they're really good at it, and they're the experts for some of the stuff. Big Questions with Cal Fussman. Cal was a reporter for 25 years for Esquire. I guess he was a freelancer technically, but he had an exclusive contract. He started his career by just going to Europe and traveling around with no plan, no money. He just went there and he learned to tell stories, really, and that's what makes him good at his job. And now he interviews people and helps them tell their stories, and helps companies tell their stories. He's got this speaking thing that he does. Seems to be a super nice guy. Anytime he and Larry King are in the same place, they're having breakfast together every day. And I'm glad he started this second part of his career. It's been super cool listening to Bert Kreischer as a comedian kind of get big through his podcast. He often has other comedians in there, but he's reaching out beyond that. He had Jordan Harbinger on recently, from formerly of Art of Charm. Just taking networking tips. It was kind of cool to listen to that happen along the way. Some other stuff that maybe you're not listening to. Hopefully you've picked up on Dan Carlin's Hardcore History. he only releases every 6 months or so, but it's usually a 4-hour masterpiece, like super researched. Duncan Trussell, you might not be familiar. He's also a comedian. He's a bit of an absurdist as a comic, and his ad reads can get a little crazy, and so can the intro rants to his podcasts. But he's what you might call a seeker. He studies Buddhism, and he is interested in magic, and that's MAGICK, like the old dark arts, like alchemy. Going back to John Dee and the Middle Ages, and just he's interested in life and living and being nice to each other, but being nice to ourselves as well. And he brings people on. He's had Stephen Kotler on, and he's had Shane Mouse, who's another, I guess he's more of an underground comic, or maybe he's not underground so much as smaller time, I guess, is a better way to put it. He's not touring arenas, he's touring clubs, and sometimes alternative venues, venues that wouldn't necessarily be comedy clubs, but that are open to having a comic come in. It's always very interesting, always learn something. Even if he and the guest are just goofing off, they often hit on something important. Should This Exist is a podcast by Katerina Fake. She created Flickr, and it's a look at burgeoning technology and the harm it can do. So, for example, one episode she was talking to somebody who printed instructions for DIY drones. Now, this is great for hobbyists, right? It's awesome. It's a project you can do with your 10-year-old, but it's also, a way for ISIS to get, easy instructions for killing machines. That's a recent example, but much more, she goes very in-depth on a lot of other stuff as well. Douglas Rushkoff, who is one of the people really responsible for making Manhattan cool back in the 70s, has a podcast called Team Human, and he's really interested in the harm that governments and companies can do, and tech as well. But really, his focus is on making us think about the consequences for humanity, for living our lives, for privacy, for anything like that. I probably don't need to tell you about Joe Rogan and Tim Ferriss and Marc Maron. They're the biggest podcasts out there. Timesuck, Dan Cummins, he does a deep dive every week on something or other. A lot of times it's a serial killer. It seems to be in his wheelhouse. It seems to be something he really enjoys, but it's not always. Sometimes it's Napoleon Bonaparte recently. He's got a whole universe that he's created, with gods and devils, and he's got a whole language behind stuff, and he breaks things up into segments. He does one, most episodes called Idiots of the Internet, where he just goes through yelling at commenters. And I'll give you one more. The Art of Making Things Happen with Steve Sims. Steve Sims was a bricklayer in England, and he decided it wasn't for him. It was a family business. He said, I'm done with this. And he was 19 or 20, and he created a business called Blue Fishing. And he really, I guess for lack of a better term, it's a concierge business. He tells a couple of stories. One story I heard him tell on a podcast was that he bet somebody that he could get them onto a party boat, and even though they weren't on the guest list. And so what he did was he just walked up to the person holding the list and said, "Yeah, my client is so and so. I understand the party's at 8 o'clock. Would you like him here at 7:45 or 8:15? Well, that person's not on the list. Well, can we make that happen? But which time would you like him here? And so they told him 7:45. So, he got the client on the boat. Another story he tells in his book is about a guy who called his company and said, "Hey, I need tickets to Playboy Mansion," and he didn't sound real convincing. And they got talking, and it turns out that the guy really wanted to go to wine country. So what he did was he said, "Look, you give me the money you were going to give me, and instead of sending you to the Playboy Mansion, I'm going to give you a VIP experience up in Napa, and I'll get you a couple of ticket stubs. Somebody else is going to the Playboy Mansion, and you can just put them on your desk, and the people at work can admire them, and you can just tell them what happens there stays there, and that you weren't allowed to take pictures." So that's what I'm listening to. Hey, hit me up. What are you listening to? Just let me know. Come on by the website, betterhumanhood.com, joshshear.com. Hit the contact form, and let's chat. Anyway, hope you have a great day, great week. See you next time. Be who you are, be who you will to be. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Get show notes and more at betterhumanhood.com. Leave us a rating and review wherever you listen to podcasts. And have yourself a wonderful day.